Section 13 of Essays of Schopenhauer. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Essays of Schopenhauer by Arthur Schopenhauer, translated by Sarah Hay Dirks. Religion, a Dialogue, Part 1. Demophiles. Between ourselves, dear old friend, I am sometimes dissatisfied with you in your capacity as philosopher. You talk sarcastically about religion, nay, openly ridicule it. The religion of everyone is sacred to him, and so it should be to you. Philalithes. Nego consequentiam. I don't see at all why I should have respect for lies and frauds because other people are stupid. I respect truth everywhere, and it is precisely for that reason that I cannot respect anything that is opposed to it. My maxim is vigeat veritas et pereat mundus, the same as the lawyers, fiat justitia et pereat mundus. Every profession ought to have an analogous device. Demophiles. Then that of the medical profession would be fiant pillulae et pereat mundus, which would be the easiest to carry out. Philalithes. Heaven forbid! Everything must be taken cum grano salis. Demophiles. Exactly, and it is just for that reason that I want you to accept religion cum grano salis, and to see that the needs of the people must be met according to their powers of comprehension. Religion affords the only means of proclaiming and making the masses of crude minds and awkward intelligences, sunk in petty pursuits and material work, feel the high import of life. For the ordinary type of man, primarily, has no thought for anything else but what satisfies his physical needs and longings, and accordingly affords him a little amusement and pastime. Founders of religion and philosophers come into the world to shake him out of his stupidity and show him the high significance of existence. Philosophers for the few, the emancipated. Founders of religion for the many, humanity at large. For philosophon plethos adinaton είναι, as your friend Plato has said, and you should not forget it. Religion is the metaphysics of the people, which by all means they must keep, and hence it must be eternally respected, for to discredit it means taking it away. Just as there is popular poetry, popular wisdom in proverbs, so too there must be popular metaphysics, for mankind requires most certainly an interpretation of life, and it must be in keeping with its power of comprehension. So that this interpretation is at all times an allegorical investiture of the truth, and it fulfills, as far as practical life and our feelings are concerned, that is to say, as a guidance in our affairs, and as a comfort and consolation in suffering and death, perhaps just as much as truth itself could, if we possessed it. Don't be hurt at its unpolished, baroque, and apparently absurd form, for you, with your education and learning, cannot imagine the roundabout ways that must be used in order to make people in their crude state understand deep truths. The various religions are only various forms in which the people grasp and understand the truth which in itself they could not grasp, and which is inseparable from these forms. Therefore, my dear fellow, don't be displeased if I tell you that to ridicule these forms is both narrow-minded and unjust. Philalithes. But is it not equally narrow-minded and unjust to require that there shall be no other metaphysics but this one cut out to meet the needs and comprehension of the people? That its teachings shall be the boundary of human researches and the standard of all thought, so that the metaphysics of the few, the emancipated as you call them, must aim at confirming, strengthening, and interpreting the metaphysics of the people. That is, that the highest faculties of the human mind must remain unused and undeveloped, nay, be nipped in the bud, so that their activity may not thwart the popular metaphysics. And at bottom, are not the claims that religion makes just the same? Is it right to have tolerance, nay, gentle forbearance, preached by what is intolerance and cruelty itself? Let me remind you of the heretical tribunals, inquisitions, religious wars and crusades, of Socrates' cup of poison, of Bruno's and Vanini's death in the flames. And is all this today something belonging to the past? What can stand more in the way of genuine philosophical effort, honest inquiry after truth, the noblest calling of the noblest of mankind, than this conventional system of metaphysics invested with a monopoly from the state, whose principles are inculcated so earnestly, deeply, and firmly into every head in earliest youth as to make them, unless the mind is of miraculous elasticity, become ineradicable? The result is that the basis of healthy reasoning is once and for all deranged. In other words, its feeble capacity for thinking for itself and for unbiased judgment in regard to everything to which it might be applied is forever paralyzed and ruined. Demophiles. Which really means that the people have gained a conviction which they will not give up in order to accept yours in its place. Philalithes. Ah, if it were only conviction based on insight, one would then be able to bring forward arguments and fight the battle with equal weapons. But religions admittedly do not lend themselves to conviction after argument has been brought to bear, but to belief as brought about by revelation. The capacity for belief is strongest in childhood. Therefore, one is most careful to take possession of this tender age. It is much more through this than through threats and reports of miracles that the doctrines of belief take root. If in early childhood certain fundamental views and doctrines are preached with unusual solemnity and in a manner of great earnestness, the like of which has never been seen before, and if, too, the possibility of a doubt about them is either completely ignored or only touched upon in order to show that doubt is the first step to everlasting perdition, the result is that the impression will be so profound that, as a rule, that is to say, in almost every case, a man will be almost as incapable of doubting the truth of those doctrines as he is of doubting his own existence. Hence it is scarcely one in many thousands that has the strength of mind to honestly and seriously ask himself, is that true? Those who are able to do this have been more appropriately styled strong minds, esprits forts, than is imagined. For the commonplace mind, however, there is nothing so absurd or revolting, but what, if inoculated in this way, the firmest belief in it will take root. If, for example, the killing of a heretic or an infidel were an essential matter for the future salvation of the soul, almost everyone would make it the principal object of his life, and, in dying, get consolation and strength from the remembrance of his having succeeded. Just as, in truth, in former times almost every Spaniard looked upon an auto da fe as the most pious of acts and one most pleasing to God. We have an analogy to this in India, in the Thugs, a religious body quite recently suppressed by the English, who executed numbers of them. They showed their regard for religion and veneration for the goddess Kali by assassinating at every opportunity their own friends and fellow travellers, so that they might obtain their possessions, and they were seriously convinced that thereby they had accomplished something that was praiseworthy and would contribute to their eternal welfare. The power of religious dogma that has been inculcated early is so great that it destroys conscience and finally all compassion and sense of humanity. But if you wish to see with your own eyes, and close at hand, what early inoculation of belief does, look at the English. Look at this nation, favoured by nature before all others, endowed before all others with reason, intelligence, power of judgment, and firmness of character. Look at these people degraded, nay, made despicable among all others by their stupid ecclesiastical superstition, which, among their other capacities, appears like a fixed idea, a monomania. For this they have to thank the clergy, in whose hands education is, and who take care to inculcate all the articles of belief at the early age in such a way as to result in a kind of partial paralysis of the brain. This then shows itself throughout their whole life in a silly bigotry, making even extremely intelligent and capable people among them degrade themselves, so that they become quite an enigma to us. If we consider how essential to such a masterpiece is inoculation of belief in the tender age of childhood, the system of missions appears no longer merely as the height of human importunity, arrogance, and impertinence, but also of absurdity, in so far as it does not confine itself to people who are still in the state of childhood, such as the Hottentots, Kaffirs, South Sea Islanders, and others like them, among whom it has been really successful. While, on the other hand, in India, the Brahmins receive the doctrines of missionaries either with a smile of condescending approval, or refuse them with a shrug of their shoulders. And among these people in general, notwithstanding the most favorable circumstances, the missionaries' attempts at conversion are usually wrecked. An authentic report in volume 21 of the Asiatic Journal of 1826 shows that after so many years of missionary activity in the whole of India, of which the English possessions alone amount to 115 million inhabitants, there are not more than 300 living converts to be found. And at the same time it is admitted that the Christian converts are distinguished for their extreme immorality. There are only 300 venal and bribed souls out of so many millions. I cannot see that it has gone better with Christianity in India since then, although the missionaries are now trying, contrary to agreement, to work on the children's minds in schools exclusively devoted to secular English instruction, in order to smuggle in Christianity, against which, however, the Hindus are most jealously on their guard. For, as has been said, childhood is the time, and not manhood, to sow the seeds of belief, especially where an earlier belief has taken root. An acquired conviction, however, that is assumed by mature converts serves, generally, as only the mask for some kind of personal interest, and it is the feeling that this could hardly be otherwise that makes a man, who changes his religion at maturity, despised by most people everywhere, a fact which reveals that they do not regard religion as a matter of reasoned conviction, but merely as a belief inoculated in early childhood, before it has been put to any test. That they are right in looking at religion in this way is to be gathered from the fact that it is not only the blind, credulous masses, but also the clergy of every religion, who, as such, have studied its sources, arguments, dogmas, and differences, who cling faithfully and zealously as a body to the religion of their fatherland. Consequently, it is the rarest thing in the world for a priest to change from one religion or creed to another. For instance, we see that the Catholic clergy are absolutely convinced of the truth of all the principles of their church, and that the Protestants are also of theirs, and that both defend the principles of their confession with like zeal. And yet the conviction is the outcome merely of the country in which each is born. The truth of the Catholic dogma is perfectly clear to the clergy of South Germany, the Protestant to the clergy of North Germany. If, therefore, these convictions rest on objective reasons, these reasons must be climatic and thrive like plants, some only here, some only there. The masses everywhere, however, accept on trust and faith the convictions of those who are locally convinced. Demophiles. That doesn't matter, for essentially it makes no difference. For instance, Protestantism in reality is more suited to the north, Catholicism to the south. Philalithes. So it appears. Still, I take a higher point of view and have before me a more important object, namely, the progress of the knowledge of truth among the human race. It is a frightful condition of things that, wherever a man is born, certain propositions are inculcated in his earliest youth, and he is assured that under penalty of forfeiting eternal salvation, he may never entertain any doubt about them. In so far, that is, as they are propositions which influence the foundation of all our other knowledge, and accordingly decide forever our point of view, and if they are false, upset it forever. Further, as the influences drawn from these propositions make inroads everywhere into the entire system of our knowledge, the whole of human knowledge is through and through affected by them. This is proved by every literature, and most conspicuously by that of the Middle Age, but also, in too great an extent, by that of the 15th and 16th centuries. We see how paralyzed even the minds of the first rank of all those epochs were by such false fundamental conceptions, and how especially all insight into the true substance and working of nature was hemmed in on every side. During the whole of the Christian period, theism lay like a kind of oppressive nightmare on all intellectual effort, and on philosophical effort in particular, hindering and arresting all progress. For the men of learning of those epochs, God, devil, angels, demons, hid the whole of nature. No investigation was carried out to the end, no matter sifted to the bottom. Everything that was beyond the most obvious causal nexus was immediately attributed to these, so that, as Pomponius expressed himself at the time, certe philosophi nihil verisimile habent ad haec, quare necesse est ad Deum ad angelos et daemones recurrere. It is true that there is a suspicion of irony in what this man says, as his malice in other ways is known. Nevertheless, he has expressed the general way of thinking of his age. If anyone, on the other hand, possessed that rare elasticity of mind, which alone enabled him to free himself from the fetters, his writings, and he himself with them, were burned, as happened to Bruno and Vanini. But how absolutely paralyzed the ordinary mind is by that early metaphysical preparation may be seen most strikingly, and from its most ridiculous side, when it undertakes to criticize the doctrines of a foreign belief. One finds the ordinary man, as a rule, merely trying to carefully prove that the dogmas of the foreign belief do not agree with those of his own. He labors to explain that not only do they not say the same, but certainly do not mean the same thing as his. With that, he fancies in his simplicity that he has proved the falsity of the doctrines of the alien belief. It really never occurs to him to ask the question which of the two is right. But his own articles of belief are to him as a priori certain principles. The Reverend Mr. Morrison has furnished an amusing example of this kind in Volume 20 of the Asiatic Journal, wherein he criticizes the religion and philosophy of the Chinese. Demophiles. So that's your higher point of view, but I assure you that there is a higher still. Primum vivere, deinde philosophari, is of more comprehensive significance than one supposes at first sight. Before everything else, the raw and wicked tendencies of the masses ought to be restrained, in order to protect them from doing anything that is extremely unjust, or committing cruel, violent, and disgraceful deeds. If one waited until they recognized and grasped the truth, one would assuredly come too late. And supposing they had already found truth, it would surpass their powers of comprehension. In any case, it would be a mere allegorical investiture of truth, a parable or a myth that would be of any good to them. There must be, as Kant has said, a public standard of right and virtue. Nay, this must at all times flutter high. It is all the same, in the end, what kind of heraldic figures are represented on it, if they only indicate what is meant. Such an allegorical truth is at all times and everywhere, for mankind at large, a beneficial substitute for an eternally unattainable truth, and in general for a philosophy which it can never grasp, to say nothing of its changing its form daily and not having as yet attained any kind of general recognition. Therefore, practical aims, my good Philalithes, have in every way the advantage of theoretical. Philalithes. This closely resembles the ancient advice of Timaeus of Locris, the Pythagorean, «Tas ψυχάς απήργομες ψεύδεσι λόγης, ή καμιάγητε αλάθεση». And I almost suspect that it is your wish, according to the fashion of today, to remind me, good friend, the time is near when we may fist off what is good in peace. And your recommendation means that we should take care in time, so that the waves of the dissatisfied raging masses may not disturb us at table. But the whole of this point of view is as false as it is nowadays universally liked and praised. This is why I make haste to put in a protest against it. It is false that state, justice, and law cannot be maintained without the aid of religion and its articles of belief, and that justice and police regulations need religion as a complement in order to carry out legislative arrangements. It is false if it were repeated 100 times. For the ancients, and especially the Greeks, furnish us with striking instantia in contrarium, founded on fact. They had absolutely nothing of what we understand by religion. They had no sacred document, no dogma to be learned, and its acceptance advanced by everyone, and its principles inculcated early in youth. The servants of religion preached just as little about morals, and the ministers concerned themselves very little about any kind of morality, or in general about what the people either did or left undone. No such thing. But the duty of the priests was confined merely to temple ceremonies, prayers, songs, sacrifices, processions, lustrations, and the like, all of which aimed at anything but the moral improvement of the individual. The whole of their so-called religion consisted, and particularly in the towns, in some of the deorum majorum gentium, having temples here and there, in which the aforesaid worship was conducted as an affair of state, when in reality it was an affair of police. No one, except the functionaries engaged, was obliged in any way to be present, or even to believe in it. In the whole of antiquity there is no trace of any obligation to believe in any kind of dogma. It was merely anyone who openly denied the existence of the gods or calumniated them that was punished, because by so doing he insulted the state which served these gods. Beyond this, everyone was allowed to think what he chose of them. If anyone wished to win the favor of these gods, privately by prayer or sacrifice, he was free to do so at his own cost and risk. If he did not do it, no one had anything to say against it, and least of all the state. Every Roman had his own lares and penates at home, which were, however, at bottom nothing more than the revered portraits of his ancestors. The ancients had no kind of decisive, clear, and least of all dogmatically fixed ideas about the immortality of the soul and the life hereafter, but everyone in his own way had lax, vacillating, and problematic ideas, and their ideas about the gods were just as various, individual, and vague. So that the ancients had really no religion in our sense of the word. Was it for this reason that anarchy and lawlessness reigned among them? Is not law and civil order rather so much their work that it still constitutes the foundation of ours? Was not property perfectly secure, although it consisted of slaves for the greater part? And did not this condition of things last longer than 1,000 years? So I cannot perceive, and must protest against the practical aims and necessity of religion in the sense which you have indicated, and in such general favour today, namely, as an indispensable foundation of all legislative regulations. For from such a standpoint, the pure and sacred striving after light and truth, to say the least, would seem quixotic and criminal if it should venture in its feeling of justice to denounce the authoritative belief as a usurper who has taken possession of the throne of truth and maintained it by continuing the deception. Demophiles. But religion is not opposed to truth, for it itself teaches truth. Only it must not allow truth to appear in its naked form, because its sphere of activity is not a narrow auditory, but the world and humanity at large, and therefore it must conform to the requirements and comprehension of so great and mixed a public, or, to use a medical simile, it must not present it pure, but must, as a medium, make use of a mythical vehicle. Truth may also be compared in this respect to certain chemical stuffs which in themselves are gaseous, but which for official uses, as also for preservation or transmission, must be bound to a firm, palpable base, because they would otherwise volatilize. For example, chlorine is for all such purposes applied only in the form of chlorides. But in truth, pure, abstract, and free from anything of mythical nature, is always to remain unattainable by us all, philosophers included. It might be compared to fluorine, which cannot be presented by itself alone, but only when combined with other stuffs. Or, to take a simpler simile, truth, which cannot be expressed in any other way than by myth and allegory, is like water that cannot be transported without a vessel. But philosophers who insist upon possessing it pure are like a person who breaks the vessel in order to get the water by itself. This is perhaps a true analogy. At any rate, religion is truth allegorically and mythically expressed, and thereby made possible and digestible to mankind at large. For mankind could by no means digest it pure and unadulterated, just as we cannot live in pure oxygen, but require an addition of 4/5 of nitrogen. And without speaking figuratively, the profound significance and high aim of life can only be revealed and shown to the masses symbolically, because they are not capable of grasping life in its real sense, while philosophy should be like the Eleusinian mysteries, for the few, the elect. End of section 13.